God has many attributes, but one attribute stands out and is repeated over and over again in the scriptures, and that is the merciful nature of God. In this series on mercy, I will share with you my reflections on God's loving mercy, from the perspective of the Jewish culture to the impact of the Babylonian exile on Israel, down to the Gospel of St. Luke, the evangelist to the Gentiles. Welcome to the podcast series on God's mercy. The man that was eaten by a giant fish, in whose belly he spent 3 days and 3 nights. You might have heard of the prophet Jonah as a child when you were reading the children's Bible. It is indeed a fascinating story. But today we will be focusing on how this impressive literature also narrates the merciful acts of the Lord. Yes, you heard me right. The story of Jonah is more a literary account than a historical one. But it doesn't mean that it cannot convey truth. Literature can also be a way of communicating an important truth to people. And during the time of ancient Israel, it was but normal. The story of Jonah was written after the Israelites' exile in Babylon. As we know, Jonah was called by God to announce the destruction of Nineveh, a powerful pagan city filled with sinful people. But Jonah tried to escape by boarding a ship whose destination is the exact opposite of Nineveh. Fast forward, Jonah found himself in the belly of a giant fish who happened to vomit him at, guess where? The city of Nineveh. There he was left with no choice but to proclaim the city's destruction unless they repent. Surprisingly, the people repented and was spared by God from annihilation. Disappointed, Jonah ranted because he went through all that trouble to announce an apocalypse that is all for naught. But God explained to Jonah, "And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right from their left?" And the story ends there. The writing of the book of Jonah is admirable because the dialogue between God and Jonah revealed something of their true character. Basing on Jonah's reaction, his being self-righteous is magnified by the way he reacted before God's mercy. He would rather have sinful people get killed than have them repent and be saved. And so Jonah was scandalized by the mercy of God, who treated them with such kindness so as to spare them from destruction. We see a familiar reaction from the parable of the workers in the vineyard in Matthew chapter 20, wherein the last workers received as much as the first ones, causing the latter to react violently to the generosity of the landowner. This shows us that the book of Jonah is meant to remind Israel that they should be merciful as God is merciful. That the goodness of God is not an exclusive one, but extends to all living souls. Jonah himself was accompanied by God's mercy throughout his journey. God even made a tree grow just to provide Jonah shade during the heat. And so he should know firsthand what mercy means. Should he not have been merciful to the people of Nineveh? The book of Jonah is a reminder that Israel is called to be a light to other nations. In the book of Deuteronomy, we hear Moses reminding the Israelites, "Observe them, God's statutes and ordinances, carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding in the sight of the peoples, who will hear from all these statutes and say, 'Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people.'" For what nation is great enough to have a God as near to them as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call on Him? Here we can see, as early as the Old Testament, that God's salvation is not only for the people of Israel, but is meant to reach the utmost ends of the earth, to the whole creation, in fact. Israel's calling is also our calling now. We are called to be a light to others, to be merciful to others, so that they may see God's mercy through us. I would like to end by saying that the story of Jonah reveals, yet once again, the real character of God. In his own words, God made a comparison between Jonah's concern over a tree that had died and God's concern over the salvation of Nineveh. Jonah was so concerned about the tree which he did not plant nor cultivate. How much more will God have concern over the people of Nineveh, whom, despite their horrible sins, were tended by Him, made grew by Him, loved by Him from the very start, whose return He lovingly waited for. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Hosea chapter 6 verse 6. This is our God. He looks back and remember how beautifully He created us, how He protected us when we were weak, how He guided us as we grow in our knowledge and love of Him, how we were His children and will always remain so. He will never give up on us. He will do whatever it takes to save us, and He did exactly that through Jesus. Thank you for listening. This podcast is a personal initiative of mine in my desire to bring God wherever His people are. I believe that the more we talk about God, the more we bring Him into our consciousness, the more we are reminded that He is real and He is ever close to each one of us. My prayer is that you discover Him personally, by yourself, and see that what He wants is nothing but happiness for you. God bless us all. Shout out to all our listeners from the US, particularly from Ohio, Washington, Texas, and New Jersey, and from Hessen and Thüringen, Germany, and of course, the Philippines. Thank you for your support. Dankeschön. Maraming salamat po.